Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Dr. Vyacheslav Alexeyevich Nikonov, a member of the Russian State Duma, which is Russia's parliament, chairman of its Committee on Science and Education, a member of the United Russia Party, a close confidant of Russian President Vladimir Putin, and the grandson of Vyacheslav Molotov, who was Stalin's famous foreign minister, but we'll talk all about that later. Dr. Nikonov, welcome to ThePrint.
My pleasure.
So we are connecting the time zones. You're in Moscow, I'm in Delhi, of course. And I'd first like to start with asking you about the India-Russia relationship. Your foreign minister, Mr. Sergei Lavrov, has been in Delhi a few days ago. The visit seems to have been somewhat turbulent. He did not meet India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who was campaigning in West Bengal because there's an election that's going on there. But how do you look at the India-Russia relationship from your vantage point in Moscow?
Well, on the one hand, this is one of the most established relationships in the world, actually. Mm-hmm. If you take a pair of great powers, Russia and India will be an exception. It is a pair which never had any confrontation, not even quarrels, not even great disputes, actually. We are friendly nations with no problems in bilateral relations, with enormous potential to develop those relationships, and with at the same time, with different views on certain international issues, though we share our views on most of the most important international issues. If you look at the voting in the United Nations Security Council, mm-hmm. you'll probably see that Russia and India vote the same way. Mm-hmm. There is no difference in the world perspective.
In many ways, yes, in many ways we do vote similarly, that's true.
Well, we view the world similarly. We are for multipolar world. We have the same set of values between them, are sovereignty, respect of the view of the others, dealing with other countries the way they are and not the way we would like to see them. Mm-hmm. So that makes our relationship easier. At the same time, yeah, there are always some problems which I would not describe as major. But geopolitically, of course, there is a big power struggle between America and China, America and Russia. And India, whether it wants to or not, it is also a sort of part of it. It has its specific relations with Russia, with America, and with China. And they're not symmetrical. And our relations with India, China, and America are not symmetrical.
So does this bother you?
Well, it does bother me, of course, and I think these asymmetries can lead to differences in our views and the problems in the bilateral relations, because for America, Russia and China are enemies. Enemies number one and number two, depending on what document in the US administration you read. Mm-hmm. In one document, there's China, which is enemy number one. In others, there's Russia, that's enemy number one. But anyway, it's Russia and China, the same boat. Mm-hmm. And they made a choice for us. They put us in the same boat, and there we are.
But do you like that boat? Do you like to be in that boat? And do you want to?
Well, no one asked us whether we like it or not. They just put us there. And we take the world as it is. It was America's choice.
No, but are you in that boat, Dr. Nikonov? Are you and China in that same boat?
Yeah, I think we are. Yes, because Americans put us there, and we are there. We see the United States as a rival in this situation. If someone calls you an enemy, you cannot regard them as friends. And Russia and China are strengthening the relationship. Yes. Russia and China are strategic partners. China is Russia's trading partner number one. It's also true for most of the countries of the world, I think, including India. Yeah. Everybody, including the United States of America. China and Russia has a similar view of most of the issues. And we hear from our Chinese partners, including the top leadership of China, this formula back to back. The relationship in which we regard China as reliable strategic rare, as well as China regarding Russia as a reliable strategic rare. For China, the symbol of their strategic threats has always been the Great China Wall. And it's against the threat from the north. Now, for the first time in 5 millennia, they have a protected, not disputed northern border. And that is something they really treasure. They think it's very important to have that sort of relationship.
So threat from the north, meaning from you, from Russia?
For us, it means also that we have a non-problematic partner in many ways. You know, we are aware of difficulties you and China have with the border disputes and struggles, some clashes and so on and so forth. Of course, we'd like you to have a closer relation with China. We are partners in BRICS, in RIC, and of course, this China-India connection is the most troubled one in whatever triangle, 5-angle, be it BRICS or whatever. We also had trouble.
So sorry to interrupt you, but how do you look at that? You know, you referred to Ladakh, where Chinese and Indian troops had been facing off these last several months. Of course, now they are disengaging and coming back to, you know, coming down from the heights. But how do you look at this tension between China and India, which is refusing to go away?
We think it is a matter which the two countries should settle. We had a similar situation with China for decades, actually. We had a war with China back in the 1960s over the island of Damansky. We had a very serious border dispute on the islands on the Amur River, and there were many clashes. But now we don't have anything like that because back in the 1990s, we spent some time sitting together and solving all these issues. I was also part of that group which was negotiating with the Chinese. It was not easy. I can tell you they're tough negotiators. They are looking long-term, very long-term. And at the end, we came to the conclusion we had to make some compromise, and we made a compromise. Actually, this island of Damansky I mentioned,
yeah,
it is a Chinese island now.
So you
no one noticed that, and we do not publicize that too much in Russia, but that's a fact.
So you gave them the island.
Yeah, they got the island. We got something in exchange. We got some islands in exchange. So there was an exchange, and there was a compromise, and we settled the border issues, and it was worth it.
But you know, on the India-China line of actual control, it isn't a border. There is still, it's a disputed line of actual control. The problem is that the Chinese are refusing to sit down and even exchange maps. But anyway, I'd like to ask you, what do you make of this Chinese intrusion across the LAC, the line of actual control, into India?
Well, for us, it's very hard to judge. We also do not have the maps of India and maps of China, and we cannot compare them. There is no way we can do it. We cannot judge. It's something which the two countries should decide. But what you should also have in mind that we are very much interested in the peaceful settlement and some really negotiated settlement of that conflict. Unlike, by the way, the Americans, who would be very much interested in continuing this dispute forever.
Mm-hmm. So did you talk to the Chinese if they are your best friends or good friends? Did you and the Chinese talk about the Ladakh conflict?
Well, no, we're not talking much about that. We have many other things to talk to, especially these days when we do not meet. We can see each other sometimes on the screens, but we're not traveling in China. China is still closed for Russians, and Russia is closed for the Chinese. Unfortunately, many of my students at Moscow State University, I'm also the Dean of Public Administration at Moscow State, and most of my Chinese students are still there, and we are communicating and making lessons through Zoom and other services. So there is not much of negotiation going on, but politically speaking, the relationship is developing. And I don't think that if India is in Russia-China debate, it's in a way Russia is promoting China to negotiate peacefully all the disputes with India.
Dr. Nikonov, don't you see that because of this bitter relationship right now at the present between India and China, the fact that the Russians seem to be taking China's side, you are such a good partner, that seems to be coming in the way of the India-Russia relationship?
Well, of course, it's a problem, but it's a matter of perception. Russia is not taking Chinese side by no way. It's not the case.
How do you
cannot take sides in this situation. We think the two countries can solve the situation by themselves. So it's not about Russia doing something wrong. It's about an Indian perception of Russia taking sides. I think it's a wrong perception.
Why do you think India has that perception?
Well, because in India, first, there is a perception of China as being a problem, and Russia being a friend of China. You know, that means Russia is on the Chinese side, which I think is a mistake. On the other hand, of course, there is an American and Western propaganda that Russia is anti-Indian in some way. I can see it easily in the Western media, which is actually trying to convince the public opinion that Russia is somewhat anti-Indian. And there is some big difference between Russia and India. Of course, Americans are interested in making our relationship as problematic as possible.
You can
because
see
they have their own strategic views on India, which are very different from ours. You know, there is also a perception in Russia that India is going American way, and that does not add to India's image in the Russian Federation, since for America, Russia is enemy number one, and they mean it. And as India is getting closer to the United States, that is regarded in Russia as potentially anti-Russian policy.
But Dr. Nikonov, don't you see that if the Russians and the Chinese are coming closer together, then in a sense, what option does India have? India should or is gravitating closer to the US.
Well, but India can gravitate closer to Russia.
But how does
that situation? It's easy. Just gravitate. No, we don't have any relationship, any problems in bilateral relations, yes, and negotiate with China. And of course, you have the option of BRICS, and you have an option of RIC, in which you can negotiate the disputes. Russia acting as a mediator, and that's what we would like to happen. I don't think India has, in this case, a predetermined vector of movement. India is an independent center of power by itself. And I don't think that Russia-China relationship, which has been there forever, for the last few decades, harmed Russian-Indian relationship in any way, except in the context of America-China, Russia-America confrontation. So I think India has a variety of strategic choices, not just going the Western way.
I think the Ladakh crisis really focused India's mind. I mean, you're absolutely right that India and Russia have a very old relationship. You know, it goes back several decades. But it was the Ladakh crisis over the last 1 year when the Chinese intruded across the line of actual control without any warning. I mean, if they believe that this is their territory, then they have to talk about it, but they refuse to even talk about it. And if the Russians are not going to say to India, listen, we are on your side on the Ladakh crisis, then I think some things will change.
Well, I don't think we can say who is right and who is wrong. That's what we tell the Chinese: negotiate with Indians and settle it according to international law. We are going to support that policy, but we cannot support China. We're not supporting China in that situation.
You're not supporting China?
Of course not.
But that's the perception India has, that you are supporting China.
We are not. That means you have a wrong perception for some reason, which has nothing to do with the Russian policies.
But you have to come out and say that, Dr. Nikonov. You haven't said it so far. The president hasn't said it. The foreign minister hasn't said it. Mr. Lavrov, when he was in Delhi, there was no mention of that at all.
Well, he didn't say that, that Russia is not supporting India?
Or he did not say that Russia is not supporting the Chinese?
First place, you introduced me as a close confidant of Mr. Putin, which is not actually true. So I don't know what he thinks about this crisis. I have no idea. Because, of course, it's not an issue in Russian foreign policy at all. There is no foreign policy debate about it. Okay. We have very much now focused on the US-American relations, US-Russia relations, not so much on Russia-China relations, less on Russia-India relations, and we're not focused on China-India relations. You know, it's important for you. It's not that important for Russia. Mm-hmm. I think there is an understanding it's a difficult border issue which has to be solved by the sides. And Russia is not supporting China.
So can I just say this? When Mr. Lavrov was in Delhi a few days ago, you know, he talks about the Quad, which is the alliance between, well, it's not an alliance right now, but it's a grouping between the US, Japan, Australia, and India. Now, Mr. Lavrov referred to it as an Asian NATO, which is what the Chinese also referred to it as that. And it seemed not to be a very friendly way of saying that.
Well, but that's how it's perceived in Russia. Yes, as a possible alliance which is aimed around the United States and aimed against America's enemies, which Russia is one of.
Are you saying that this alliance is perceived as being anti-Russia?
Well, it is perceived as being an instrument of American foreign policy. And in American foreign policy, Russia is enemy number one.
But in my opinion, this alliance has nothing to do with Russia. It's to do with China. And if China is going to become world number one very soon, overtaking even the economic superpower that is the US, then, you know, India needs friends to protect itself.
Well, you should not regard Russia as a country which is pursuing someone else's national interests. The Russian policy will always be pro-Russian. You should understand that. We will never regard NATO as something being pleasant to Russia because it's pleasant to the United States, you know? Or countries of NATO consider that the way they pursue their national interests. From Russian point of view, NATO is a problem.
Sure.
Any military alliance headed by the United States is a problem because for the United States, Russia is enemy number one. It doesn't matter whether Americans are coming to our borders from the east, from the west, from the south. We have around 400 American military naval bases around Russian borders. 400. Some of them are in the south, some of them are in the east, some of them are in the west. And when you say that this grouping of American allies has nothing to do with Russia, we understand it's not exactly the case. It's not just about Russia. We understand it's more about China than about Russia, but it's about Russia as well.
So the fact that India is a member of the Quad is problematic.
Yes, it is.
Because you feel that this is...
Because it's an American-led alliance, and America is building up alliances against Russia.
So this sounds like a new Cold War, where the world is again being divided up.
No, I think the situation is much worse than in the Cold War. For us, it is. In the Cold War, there were many channels of communication, for example, between Russia and the United States. Now they are non-existent. There were many arms control agreements and many arms control agreements being negotiated between Russia and the United States. Nothing of this sort is happening now. During the Cold War, there were no American troops in Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, Czech Republic, Bulgaria, Romania, and a few other countries on the Russian borders, you know. So for us, the situation is much worse than during the Cold War. And of course, during the Cold War, there were no sanctions, no personal sanctions about Politburo members of the Soviet Union, never. And now all the Russian elite is under sanctions. Only President Trump introduced 47 rounds of anti-Russian sanctions. President Biden recently called Mr. Putin a killer. And I don't think there was any reaction on the Indian side, some negative reaction to that statement. So for us, the situation is much worse than during the Cold War. And Americans are building alliances. And it's one of the bulks of the Biden's foreign policy, making alliances of democracies. Putting of course India on the democracy side against totalitarian monsters, which are Russia and China. So for us, situation is not as good as it was during the good old days of the Cold War.
But Dr. Nikonov, I'm sure there is some difference between the Russians and the Chinese. You still have elections. I mean, the great leader in China, Xi Jinping, he has declared himself to be the great leader for life.
Russia has the elections. It has freedom of expression. We're not banning the internet. No one is banned like President Trump and his supporters in Twitter or anywhere else. The distance between right and left in the Russian Federation is several miles longer than in the United States. Maybe not as long as in India, which is unlimited, I think. The problem, of course, there are problems with Russia and China. Russia, we have different views of certain issues. We have different views on Central Asia. We do have different political system, but it doesn't matter, because strategically we have too much in common. We make our relationship on the basis of national interests, and we deal with the government which exists and not the governments would like to have. This division of democracies and non-democracies is very, very artificial, because in the list of American democracies, you'll find a whole bunch of absolute autocracies which never had an election, headed by heirs of the prophet. And on the non-democratic side, you'll have Russia and a few other countries which in my mind are very much democratic. So
what about the Alexei Navalny story? I mean, here
yes.
is a man who wanted to protest against various issues in Russia, for example, freedom of speech, and yet he's been put behind bars.
Well, but he had all opportunities to express his views. In all ways. And he is in prison because he was on probation and he violated the rules of probation. And that's why he's there. He's a crook, and crooks are in jail. And
what would you say about the allegation that he was poisoned by the Russian authorities?
This is what I would call the test on being an idiot. You know why? They're speaking about Novichok. Mm-hmm. Novichok is a chemical weapon which was designed to substitute the nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. It is a binary military gas which is composed of two elements which become poisonous when combined by the explosion. And then they can keep up to 1 million people. Mm-hmm. Poisoning of Navalny by Novichok, only an idiot can believe it. And of course, there is no reason anyone would poison a man with a rating less than 1% of the public support. No one in Russia ever knew of Navalny because this whole poisoning scandal and all this wave in the West that he was an important human rights activist. No one ever had an idea of him being important. I don't think he is.
But would you agree that you have not handled this case properly? You know, protest.
I think I don't know how we handled the crisis. It was the court who was handling the crisis. There was no the crisis actually inside Russia. The court just did its work, and that was it.
Okay. So just to come back, last few questions, Dr. Nikonov, just to come back on the India-Russia relationship. Now, when Mr. Lavrov was in Delhi a few days ago, from Delhi, he went to Pakistan. And this is the first time in 9 years that a Russian foreign minister has been to Pakistan. That didn't go down well in Delhi. How
well, I think, I don't know why he did it. I think that was a message to India that we regard some of your relationship, including the one with the United States, as also not being very favorable from our viewpoint. So maybe that was the message. I have no idea why Lavrov did that. Maybe so. Maybe because Mr. Modi didn't say a word after Biden called Putin a killer.
So there is turbulence then in the India-Russia relationship?
No, I don't think there is.
The fact that Prime Minister Modi did not come out, you know, in favor of President Putin on Joe Biden's description.
Well, but he's not the only one who didn't do that. But and why we understand why that happens. But I don't think that Putin would properly understand all the motives, and he would could probably expect some support, at least from his friends.
So then there is, at least from his friends, which would presumably include Prime Minister Modi.
I think so.
So he would like some.
I would expect Prime Minister Modi to say a few words about that.
You would expect him to do that.
Yes.
So then it seems to me that there is a balancing going on. As you believe that the Indians are moving closer to the US, Russia is balancing its India relationship with Pakistan on the one side and China on the other. Am I correct?
No, we're not balancing our relations against India because we do not have nothing to balance against India. We have nothing against India. We are for India in every aspect. We are very friendly with an Indian nation. We want to cooperate with India as close as possible. So I think it's India which is in this situation is making some moves. Russia is not getting closer to China. We are close to China, close enough for many years. As for Pakistan, I don't think there is Pakistan on Russia's political map at all. It may be just a signal. It may be. I would not exclude that, but I'm not quite sure since, as I've said, I'm not meeting President Putin every day. And of course, I never had a chance to discuss with him problems of Russia-India or Russia-Pakistan relations.
Okay, on Afghanistan, Dr. Nikonov, do you have a comment on how things are coming together? Do you think they're falling apart as the Americans withdraw? You know, you have your own experience, the Soviet experience of Afghanistan.
Well, I think Americans will not withdraw. The only debate about Afghanistan and Russia is about should we support America in their struggle in Afghanistan in this situation when Americans are going nuts in every other direction. And actually the answer is by far, yes, we are. We're still allowing the transit through Russia territory, which is so important for the military operation. There is also a talk whether we should deal with Taliban or not, but this is something they discuss in the newspapers more than anywhere else from time to time, not even on television. It's not something that was of any interest to anybody. I don't believe Americans will leave Afghanistan in any foreseeable future. Of course, it's a funeral for the empires, but I think, or the graveyard for the empires. But in my mind, it was Iraq, which was the graveyard for American empire, not Afghanistan. So they'll stay there for a while. For them, that might be a geostrategic Klondike, on the other hand. because it's close to Russia, it's close to China, it's close to Central Asia. So I do not believe in talks that Americans are leaving. They are already in the longest war in American history, being there for 20 years, and I don't see them coming out.
Right. Dr. Nikonov, my last question to you is about your legacy as the grandson of Molotov. How do you look at this legacy?
Well, I wrote a few books about him. I know him pretty well because I was 30 when he died. So he was the last Leninist, the old guard, very strong man, who was, of course, a great diplomat.
Yeah.
For me, being his grandson was a big problem during all my life, because in the Soviet Union, he was the enemy of the nation. He was kicked out from the foreign ministry 1 week before I was born. So I was growing up in the family of the enemy of the nation. That was not an easy thing to do, but I survived. And that made me stronger.
Dr. Nikonov, you have been very frank and answered every question of mine. I truly appreciate your frankness, and thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for speaking to ThePrint, and I hope we can continue to be in touch, and I hope we can do more interviews again.
Thank you, my pleasure.